Good evening. I am not Scott Allen, which you who know Scott Allen know that. My name's Tim Markle. I'm director of the Southern Regional Center for Children and Youth with Special Health Care Needs here at the Weisman Center. I am also on the board of the Autism Society of South Central Wisconsin. Because of the great combination of the Weisman Center, Scott Allen's vision, and the help from the Autism Society of South Central Wisconsin, we are excited that you are here tonight to listen to autism as we are and to interact with us this evening. The program is going to be some short talks interspersed with some videos, and everybody that you're going to hear except for Miss Lindsay is going to, well, she'll be speaking from her heart as well. But you'll get the theme. You're going to hear what it's really like and who people really are. None of the scientific stuff, but some of the real stuff. As real as the science. I am so excited for this evening. Scott talked about this a few months ago, and the fact that it came together, that you guys have come out on a gorgeous night. What, the first time we haven't had snow in weeks? So thank you so very much for being here. And I'd like to introduce Lindsay McCrary from the Weisman Center Clinics.
So thank you all for being here. Scott had asked me to do a brief overview of autism spectrum disorder from a clinical perspective, and then we'll hear from our presenters after that. So many of you might be familiar with how we used to talk about autism under this umbrella of pervasive developmental disorders. And so we had distinct diagnostic categories, including Asperger's syndrome, autistic disorder, and pervasive developmental disorder, not otherwise specified. But what we learned through research and following kids and adults over time is that these categories aren't very meaningful, that the same individual might be identified with autistic disorder at one point, Asperger's syndrome at another point, or PDD-NOS at a different point. So to make things a little bit more concise and streamlined, we've changed the diagnostic criteria and how we think and talk about autism spectrum disorder. So we think about autism as a neurological condition, so there are changes in the brain and things that are happening that lead to certain symptoms or behaviors that we can observe. It's a diagnosis that typically we make in childhood, but is a lifelong condition. When we talk about autism spectrum disorder, we're really talking about two core features, and that is differences in how a person communicates or participates in social interactions, and also the presence of restricted or repetitive behaviors. So what do we mean by social communication? We're talking about things like back and forth conversation, use of eye contact or other nonverbals, gestures, understanding other people's nonverbals, initiating social relationships, and maintaining social relationships. And then for restricted and repetitive behaviors, we're talking about things like motor behaviors, so hand flapping or rocking and spinning, repetitive use of objects, so lining things up, difficulty with change in routines or in our environment, highly restricted interests, so interests that might be more intense, and sensory behaviors, so either being oversensitive to different input or undersensitive to that. So again, it's kind of a combination of different symptoms in these two main areas. I put this slide up here just to illustrate the complexity of autism spectrum disorder, that not everybody with autism presents with the same combination of symptoms. They may have different co-occurring conditions like anxiety or attention difficulties, stomach or GI problems, sleep problems, and not everybody is going to have all of these symptoms, and some people may have a lot of them. So we really need to consider the individual's perspective and the needs that they might have, and what other factors might be impacting their daily functioning. Just some brief facts and figures. The most recent prevalence data suggests that 1 in 68 children, and these are children who are 8 years of age, has a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder, and that is more common in males than females. We also know that about 10% of individuals with autism spectrum disorder have a co-occurring genetic condition, such as Down syndrome or Fragile X syndrome, that increases the likelihood of that autism condition. Many individuals can be identified with autism spectrum disorder around 2 years of age, and that diagnosis will be stable over time. But because there can be some subtle presentations and symptoms, the average age of identification is about 4.7 or 4 to 5 years of age. There has been an increase in the number of people diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder, a pretty significant increase, and there are a variety of reasons why that might be. But we don't have one good answer to why there is such an increase in prevalence. It's important to understand that there's not one cause of autism spectrum disorder, but it is a combination of genetic predisposition or genetic changes, environmental factors, and biological factors that are all interacting within one system where that leads to some people presenting with these symptoms. The most important part, I think, for tonight's discussion is understanding the variety of myths that exist in the public about autism spectrum disorder. We don't always know what an individual's kind of life course is going to look like. We do know that autism is not caused by bad parenting. People with autism can have meaningful, successful relationships, including romantic relationships. They're capable of living independently, going to college, having a job. So all of these things are just myths that we talk about or that people might perseverate, but we want to understand that people with autism are human, and we want to hear from their perspective tonight. So with that, I'm going to introduce Brett Rainin Nachman to come up and share his perspective.
All right, good evening. First of all, thank you for coming out tonight. I really appreciate it, and thank you for having me. I'm going to talk a little bit about my experiences, my life experiences, but also my research, which you'll see has direct connections to the topic tonight. I aimed to be the next Walter Cronkite or Peter Jennings. Well, maybe not completely, but to be a journalist was my professional goal from the time I started watching World News Tonight at age 11. To share other individuals' stories of victories and struggles was one of my greatest passions, as it would blend my endless curiosity with my aptitude in writing. The notion of interviewing other individuals, however, for a guy who experienced major stress in merely picking up a phone, seemed really improbable. Needless to say, I endeavored to be a journalist, and in one way or another, I knew as a 17-year-old with Asperger's who had major social anxieties at the time that I was not quite ready to attend Arizona State University, which I grew up in Phoenix, where I lived at the time. Therefore, after much anticipation and planning, I ended up taking classes at Scottsdale Community College. We're home of the Fighting Artichokes, our vegetable. Our mascot is a vegetable. It's always a great conversation starter. At SEC, I would establish my college foundation there. First, I took Psychology 101, which ignited my passion in unraveling the meaning of being human, even with different ways of interpreting the world. And it lit up an interest in trying to understand how my peers of different ages, identities, life experiences, and pathways into college would use the 2-year college, community college, as a mechanism for improving and charting the course of their lives. I did not know what awaited in college, though my parents had long told me of what college could afford: opportunity. The opportunity to get outside of one's comfort zone, to experiment, to succeed, to fail, to view each new situation as a learning experience. And it's the opportunity for a college education that can transform a student's life, no matter the obstacles that have been placed in their way, whether by society or at times self-imposed. It was at SCC where I learned to self-advocate for myself, lead the college newspaper, interview people as they recalled tragedies and triumphs in their lives, and eventually, quote unquote, come out as having Asperger's when I delivered my student commencement speech at graduation. I later transferred to Arizona State, where I obtained my degree from the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism, and I achieved a lot of my objectives there. Though my career was preparing me to learn how to communicate with other individuals and to share their stories, little would I have realized that my trajectory would really shift to unraveling the complexities of academia. And gradually, I would end up sharing my own story in different ways. And this was in an endeavor to understand other people's stories. So my name is Brett Breenan-Ackman. I'm a doctoral student at University of Wisconsin-Madison in its Educational Leadership and Policy Analysis Department, and I studied the depictions and experiences of college students with autism. So when I started graduate school about 3 years ago, I decided to engage in a form of me-search, which entails studying populations that in one way or another an individual belongs to. I wanted to unite two of my more salient identities and translate that to my research agenda. So in my case, it was focusing on community college students, two-year college students, as well as college students with autism. So this intersection of identities and interests serves as the foundation of my work. First, it's important to realize that research studies involving college students with autism are relatively new. It's hard to know how many college students with autism there are. And that's for two main reasons. One is some individuals, college students, were never diagnosed. Some fail to disclose. This is where I'm going to share some little statistics, so bear with me. White, Olin, Dick, and Bray, 2011, estimate that anywhere from 1 in 130 to 1 in 53 college students would meet the criteria for high-functioning autism. No matter the numbers, though, it is important, and it is clear that of those who are out to their colleges, those individuals tend to gravitate toward two-year community colleges. The Digest of Education Statistics report in 2016 found that 6 years post-graduation from high school, 46.6% of high schoolers with autism who received special ed services went on to enroll in college. Further, these students are twice as likely to attend two-year institutions than four-year institutions. So about 32.6% compared to 15.7%. So we're seeing a really large number in those types of institutions. And many studies that have emerged over the past 3-5 years or so demonstrate how rarely college students with autism are included as participants in the study. So that means that our understanding of their experiences is really limited to evaluating studies with small sample sizes, single institutions, and really no diversity in terms of gender, race, and other characteristics. So as I'm finding in some of the studies I'm conducting, how institutions and future faculty members, those are two studies I'm working on, view autism, how they're framed, can shape the general sentiment toward college students with autism. These attitudes can be positive through valuing their individual strengths, or on the other end, they could be negative, looking at those false perceptions, that deficit-based language that's very pervasive. That said, I recognize that there's a wide diversity of college students on the autism spectrum, and this is exactly what future scholarship and research needs to explore and incorporate. Students' behavioral manifestations of autism and presentations vary across the board, as do the number of other identities that these students possess, whether it be based on co-occurrence with other disabilities, based on their race, their socioeconomic status, first-generation status to college potentially, their sexual orientation, their gender identity, among other factors. My work in conjunction with other scholars emphasizes how capturing the vastly different perspectives of college students with autism will provide us with a richer foundation and understanding of how themes like diagnosis rates, college access, and social integration are often bounded by these often overlooked factors. Slowly but surely, the research is broadening in scope. I'm seeing it, and it's encouraging, increasing in frequency and enlightening practitioners and scholars outside the disability world encouraging them to act with more consideration and diligence in ensuring that college students with autism are no longer a side point or an asterisk. Our collective efforts as those who are part of the community, as those who are our allies, those who practice and research autism, all of us can collectively raise the voices and involvement of college students with autism. And that can be in the form of conversations like tonight's events. So thank you for being here on that front, because you're definitely part of that effort in learning and sharing perspectives. It can also be in the form of research studies, hosting documentaries on campuses or in other venues that feature autistic individuals, ensuring that texts or pieces of content are produced by individuals who are on the spectrum themselves. All of these are important and can enhance the dialogue regarding inclusive and equitable opportunities for all college students. And we also have to act with mindfulness in appreciating the spectrum of college students on the spectrum, because there's really no one-size-fits-all approach. We realize that this is a very much individual experience. So raising both the figurative and literal visibility of autism in our discussions will help us move forward as a society where autism is neither an isolated talking point nor one where folks with autism are always being talked about rather than sharing their own perspectives too. So again, I hearken back to that theme of opportunity. It's an abstract word that has a wide variety of connotations. When I reflect back on my own college experiences over nearly a decade, I'm feeling very old now. I have a few more years to go until I get my doctorate, but I reflect on this period and think ahead, and I feel very privileged and pleased that I've been given opportunities to be able to share my voice and to be able to contribute to the field, to learn from other individuals, to attain funding for my education, and carve out my place as an emerging scholar. But I'm immediately transported back to that first day of my Psychology 101 class. I hoped for a few basic ideals, and maybe these are some that others share too. It was the notion of a sense of belonging in a new environment. It was to explore new interests and to be guided by those in academia. So I walked away from that 5-week summer course with a foundation of both psychology and personally what it meant, what the college experience could represent. College is an experience of opportunity. Some students are afforded certain privileges. We have to be very mindful of that. Others have humble means and resources. Many students reinvent themselves over the course of their college experience, and along the way might be afforded opportunities too. Opportunities present themselves in different ways and times. Sometimes you can't always see them, but through embracing the ones that arrive and working toward those that are currently out of reach, both individuals on the spectrum and their communities can gain innumerable benefits. So thank you for this opportunity to share with you a little bit about my research and personal story tonight. I hope that my work, my fellow scholars' work, fellow self-advocates' work and stories, as they illustrate collectively, that this will help a collective effort toward more stories being shared, and that more stories of college students on the autism spectrum will be unraveled too. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Brett. For those who are a little worried, Scott is here, so have no fear. You will get to hear from Scott, but we'd like to take a moment now to watch a video with our friend Matt Ward.
My name is Matt Ward. I am 39 years old. I have lived in my own apartment in Madison since 2003. I graduated from the UW-Madison in May of 2005 with a BS in mathematics. My parents found out that I was autistic when I was 18 months old. I have lots of trouble communicating, but I am very smart. My nonverbal IQ score tested at 144 when I was 14. And I took a test of visual spatial skills when I was in middle school. I scored higher than the top of the high school scale. My parents weren't even able to understand my math homework after I was in the 5th grade. Even though I am smart, I constantly struggle to communicate. My language is quite good, but I think in pictures. This makes talking stressful because it takes a lot of effort for me to change my thoughts into words. In spite of all of this, I have been doing a lot of public speaking since 1996. I've spoken at conferences, training sessions, and university classes about autism. The last thing my parents expected was to see me on the speaker circuit, but here I am. It is easier for me to talk when I can read the words. That's why I am able to give speeches. My mother helps me organize my thoughts into printed words by interviewing me and writing down my thoughts in the major parts of my speech. If I had to do that much writing myself, it would be too stressful. My mom also helps me put in the funny parts because I just don't know why you NT people laugh at things most of the time. I then edit my speech and make any necessary changes. By the way, my mom never wrote any of my homework for school. I just need help customizing my speeches for different audiences and topic focus. It is very important to me that I am able to communicate with audiences like this. I never turn down a chance to speak. I feel like it is my chance to give back to my community. I can explain to listeners you can still be really smart and accomplish a lot even if you don't talk as easily as other people. Being able to read speeches like this makes me feel like I finally have a voice of my own. Thank you for listening to me. That's it.
We're also very excited that Matt is able to be with us tonight, so hopefully you might have a chance to meet him afterwards. So I'm very thankful that he's able to come out and share time with us as well as his wonderful words. I'd like to bring up Serena to talk to us a little bit about a woman's perspective on autism. Serena, thank you so much.
Thank you. And thank you to Matt for providing the artwork that you see up here and on the flyers. It's quite incredible. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my experience, some of my symptoms, and then I'm going to talk about kind of a lot of things that my friends and I have discussed about being on the autism spectrum and what we'd like to see. I learned from a very young age that I had to conform to the way that others socialized. One incident that really stands out in my mind is the time I was at my neighbor's house watching one of my favorite cartoons. Anyone in here ever watched Animaniacs? Awesome. It's one of my favorites. Although the cartoon was very entertaining, I was not expressing this in any observable manner. My neighbor thought that because I wasn't laughing out loud that I wasn't having fun. Since I found it very important to show her that I enjoyed both the show and her company, from that point on, instead of watching the cartoon, I focused on making eye contact and laughing every time she laughed. Well, I didn't have enough energy to both pay attention to the show and outwardly express that I was enjoying it, and to me that seems like some kind of weird Heisenberg uncertainty principle of social interaction. But it's definitely the case, and as a result of that, Spending time with her suddenly felt like some sort of exhausting chore. And after that day, every time she came to my house, I would go hide from her in my bedroom because it was just too much work for me most times. Until my diagnosis at age 27, my social struggles remained nearly invisible to others. And so did a lot of other symptoms that made socializing and daily life quite difficult for me. My vision is like constantly looking at the world through a television set with terrible reception. I can't focus my eyes on anything moving, so I struggle to observe the nonverbal language of others simply because everything is a blur. Patterns, brick walls, that carpeting, and especially horizontal blinds look like those optical illusions where it appears to be moving, but it's actually not. So I'm constantly seeing things like that in my field of vision, so it makes everything kind of dizzying. In addition to that, loud noises, strong smells can be quite overwhelming for me. When I was a kid, my mom thought I was being sassy, and whenever she'd yell at me, I'd say that she was hurting my ears. But in reality, she was quite literally hurting my ears. And the physical sensation from that noise felt like being on a boat in the middle of a storm. It's just very, very disorienting. Forcing my mind to stay aware of all of this chaos is an exhausting battle that I lose countless times each day. It's like being so tired that I'm unable to stay awake, but instead of falling asleep, I slip into an unawareness of my surroundings and become lost in my own thoughts. Frequent mental breaks like this are the only way I can get through my day. And on top of that, there's the physical exhaustion. Since I can remember, I would start each morning dizzy and tired and spend the entire day with my muscles and joints aching with fatigue. Eating never helped either. In fact, it only made my stomach pains worse. My efforts to communicate this were usually just dismissed as me being lazy. It gave me the impression that everyone else was dealing with the same exact thing, but my struggles were simply due to a lack of willpower or ambition, and not that there was something different about me. Autism acceptance is vital for the well-being and safety of autistic people. When we are required to fully conform to the social expectations of others, we learn that our emotions, our needs, morals, and values are secondary to those of others. We become prone to low self-esteem, are much more likely to experience depression and anxiety, and we learn that not only is it acceptable, but accepted that others are allowed to overstep our boundaries. Socializing becomes associated with enduring situations in which we feel anxious, uncomfortable, or unsafe. When all of our interactions with others feel similar, we cannot learn to clearly distinguish between the people who care about us and those who are trying to take advantage of us. People on the autism spectrum are especially susceptible to victimization. One study in Canada found that 78% of autistic adults, regardless of gender, have experienced sexual violence. Instead of being primed to be victims, we on the autism spectrum need to be empowered to make our own decisions, socially and otherwise. We also need to be supported in discovering and enforcing our personal boundaries. Most importantly, we need to be accepted for who we are so that we can experience a better quality of life. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. I'd like you now to just sit back, and we're going to have a video reflection from Samantha Diaz.
Hello there, my name is Samantha and I have Asperger's syndrome. I'm originally from Harvard, Illinois, but I recently moved to Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So I work at Marketing Service Incorporated as an imager. So what I do for my duty is that I work with different materials to print out and labels with pipe marker and tape. And for me, in my case, is that I would want people to be respectful because everyone should treat each other equally because everyone deserves to be treated equally as well. I would want people to think that I'm a good person with unique personality. I knew that not everyone are going to like me, but I'd rather be around people who will accept me by who I am because this will help me to feel more secure about themselves. In this case, like I'd rather be around with those kind of people because like I said, they're gonna help me to feel feel better about myself. If I be with the people who doesn't accept who I am and who understood me, it's gonna make me feel really insecure of myself, and that's not what we wanted. Or in my case, I wouldn't want that for myself too as well. But we rather be around people who is gonna accept us and understand us because we all deserve to be treated equally, and we all deserve to feel like we're not alone. For my case, there's a lot of things I liked about myself. I like that I'm unique and strong-minded. As an artsy young lady, I have high spiritual soul and open-minded, and I care for others. I am the first generation of Mexican American with Asperger's syndrome, and I always have felt like I was so different than other Hispanic girls when I was growing up. Majority of them didn't want to go to school, and they wanted to like drop out of school because they don't want to try their hardest to get education. But as for me, I decided to have education because this will help me to have a better future and to know more about myself. And plus, this will help us to be more understanding, to help us to have a good life, to have a better run for our future. So which is why I decided to have education, because I know that this will help me to succeed, even if I'm an autistic lady, but I'd rather have education to have a good life in this case. I am very creative. I'm an artsy lady. I love drawings. I love like anime obsession. It's one of my biggest like obsession, and for my hobbies, I love like talking about anime shows with friends. I really enjoy my hobbies that I like to do in my free time. I love like that, like I'm very like unique and open-minded, and I try my best not to judge other people. And for my case, I want to help people, in this case, help everyone. I believe that I believe that people in the autism spectrum tends to be very talented and unique in their own ways. I've noticed that when I went to college, I noticed a lot of autistic people were very kind and one of the most successful people in this case. But I felt like there was like something different about them, and I sensed that there was like a connection. I can relate to them with their systems, but I decided not to judge them because I'm autistic too as well. So what I know is that like I went to UW-Whitewater and I majored in graphic design. I believe that that's just so I can improve. Everyone should respect and support autistic people because this will secure others if they accepted them by who they are. Like I mentioned earlier, is that like if we accept and understand others for people on the autism spectrum, it's going to help them, and it's going to help them to succeed for their long run for their future. And then for my case and stuff, I feel like that since I went to college, I have a job. It shows me that like I got a lot of support and got help by friends and family. But if it wasn't for their support I wasn't gonna be able to have education that I have. I want to be able to get the help that I have. I will feel a lot more secure in myself and be very unsatisfied. But in this case, is that like if we help others and support people in the autism spectrum, they're gonna get a lot of support, and they're gonna be a lot more satisfied with themselves. And that like we should like always keep trying, even if we struggle a lot of things. But I feel like that every autistic people should always keep trying their best to support themselves, because this will help them to succeed, to have a better future for their future run. I just want to say that thank you very much for watching this, and have a great day. Thank you again.
Samantha. Our next speaker is probably a little bit afraid of what I might say, because I've actually known Tony now for the last year through the leadership education and neurodevelopmental disabilities and LEND. It's just called LEND. So I was really pleased when I saw Tony was on the docket to speak tonight. So Tony, come on up.
Hello, can everyone hear me? Yeah, no matter how many times I talk in front of people, I always get nervous. Don't know why that is. I've talked to people who in crowds maybe 10 times large as this, and I don't know what it is. Human condition. So let me just start out the speech by saying hello. My name is Antonio Marquez, or Tony Marquez Barrientos, as you might see on your docket, and I'm here to talk about autism rights, at least what I know about them. And I'm also here to talk about the autistic and the disabled community. I'm here to give my beliefs on the current situation that our society has regarding these topics in the United States. These beliefs are my own, formed from a lifetime of experiences talking to thousands of people on topics too various to mention. In my free time, I volunteer as a reporter for a local radio station, and I have to talk to everyone from scientists to community leaders to, guys on the street. And they've all given me something to think about, each in their own way. Before I begin, I'd just like to prep you all, give you a few things to think about, to help you understand what the disabled community is and what it contains. I hope that when this is through, that you all have more knowledge than you began with, and you have something to think about. You have more perspective. A quote I often find myself going back to is, "A fish doesn't know water exists until it jumps out of it," meaning that what we come to know as usual can be turned upside down. Keep in mind that even though I've had autism all my life, I've studied the condition, and I've known many people with autism, autism is something that we continue to study, to learn about, and to understand. It's unique from person to person. There is no exact thing we can pinpoint on our genes. There is no pill we can pop that suddenly makes autism disappear. There is no cure. And some people don't even like thinking that there is a cure because they think, well, I've had this all my life. It's my identity. I can't even think of life without it. So I can't speak in absolutes. And autism, unfortunately, is paired with a lot of mental health conditions. It can be anxiety, it can be depression, and in some cases a light OCD. I haven't seen everybody with autism, so I guess I can only really say a few generalities. And now, with all that out of the way, I'd like to say that even though I have autism, and even though people I sit with have autism, we are all part of humanity, even if we do have a classification. I enjoy movies. I consider myself straight, and I enjoy city life. I have, however, met people with autism who have had the exact opposite experiences and preferences in their own lives. They might hate movies. They might enjoy the country. I've had people try to understand my jokes, and as I try to explain, saying, okay, this is funny because we put ourselves in one situation, and this that we build ourselves around. And when something comes out of left field, just non sequitur, it's funny. It's something you unexpect. You're not expected. It's not expected. It's unexpected. And I just talking to this person, and they're just like, okay, but why? Isn't that offensive? I'm saying, no. You see, it's so out there, and it's we're all different. And that same person, I just was just sitting there, and we just casually mentioned one thing, and she just burst out laughing so hard. I was thinking, wow, I didn't think I was that funny. So we vary from one person to the next person with autism, as we vary from one person with autism to another person without autism. You know, I recall one time I was part of an autism group at my college, and we were invited by a teacher in special education, professor really, who was prepping students to become special educators or related fields. And we walked in there that day, and they were bustling about, and things quieted down, and we asked for initial impressions. And one of the things that seemed to be common among a whole bunch of students is that they were surprised to look at us. I mean, they did not understand that we had autism. They could not wrap their heads around that a person with autism could be that person you walk past on your way to class. I mean, we were just regular people, and I could have been shocked, I could have been offended, but you know, I kind of found the whole thing funny. It was an opportunity to change it right there and then, that hey, I could be that person right next to you. And yeah, I have autism. I struggle with it. I might think differently, but yeah, I'm just a regular person. And yeah, maybe I don't need to constantly be calling myself in an obvious way, but yeah. It was an opportunity for them to learn. Now, it's true that sometimes autism isn't a condition that you can deduce easily, and it's not cerebral palsy. You don't have problems with your muscles sometimes, and you sometimes don't have a facial tic. And it can be overlooked, it can be misdiagnosed if you are just a person who sits with a confident posture and speaks clearly. It can be overlooked, and it can be misdiagnosed. And it's an excellent point to consider that disability is not always an obvious presentation. Autism does not always present itself in an obvious way. It takes a metaphorical village of people to diagnose and treat an individual. I've seen many experts over my lifespan, and I'll get back to that in a bit. Now, this village is important. There are important points in our lives when we need resources for growing intellectually as well as physically. No matter what your brain is like, no matter what your body is like, these points are critical. As you're a baby, as you're a kid, when you're growing up, these things are important. You need to understand your world. You need to find things that are safe. You need to you need to write. You need to communicate. Autism is a broad, multi-symptom condition that requires physical practices and strategies, as well as mental strategies to help us keep up with our peers. Disability, as you can probably call it with autism, has meant that we have had to encounter obstacles to keep up with our peers. Fortunately, a lot of us are diagnosed early, and we receive treatment throughout the years, but some people aren't as lucky. At school, I had to personally attend physical therapy, speech practice, and counseling to help myself communicate with the world and to do schoolwork. I always found it so frustrating that I always wrote slower than the other kids, and when they were finished, I was on the first paragraph and my hands were hurting. And I hated that I had to go to physical therapy, stretch rubber bands, get those metal clamps and squeeze them and learn to type and learn on my cursive when no one else did that except for one guy. I don't know what he did. We all did our assignments in physical therapy separately. I hated it and it was hard, but I hate even more to think of where I would be if I had not received those services, if I had not been able to endure those hardships, if I had not been able to connect with my speech pathologist, if I not had received that training in high school to help me communicate what I was thinking, because not everyone is inside my brain understanding what I'm seeing, what I'm wanting to communicate about. It was hard, but I'm thankful I received them. And I don't know if I could really thank anybody personally of those who helped me, but they're in my thoughts. If there is no help for people with autism or the disabled community, those opportunities are missed. And then it gets harder and harder. Paths are missed, and then the paths get harder to get back on. We get deeper into the woods. It's something that needs to be addressed and something that needs to be well equipped with. To sum up, we're human, we're unique, but we need help to keep up. Today, I believe we're not providing the standards that we vow to enforce through decades of legislation. Accessibility to these services is an issue. And it's not only universal to those affected by Asperger's syndrome disorder, but it's universal to people who have disabilities in all cases. The disabled community has come a long way in finding ways to accommodate adults, in way to provide services, in ways of research. But I find that there are problems in the implementations of what we plan to do, and I constantly think that this is an issue that politicians constantly ignore. Sometimes the guarantees are written in the law, but it just doesn't happen. Are we getting the special education teachers in the classroom? Are we getting them available to our students? Are they as rare as unicorns? Because frankly, my mother is a special education teacher, and I've known many teachers, and heck, Wisconsin's a great example of where we cannot find special education teachers readily. People have to travel miles. Special education teachers have to double as kindergarten teachers, and that is frankly almost next to impossible with IEPs. The truth is, the disabled community the truth is that being disabled usually means you're the last ones considered when policy is made. When funding is cut off from school, do people mention the disabled community and the special education teachers? Well, yeah, we're lumped in there with saying that we need teachers, but I hardly see anyone raise that issue. If food stamps are cut, do we talk about the people who need those food stamps and benefits to help give services to their children who constantly need medical care? I don't see that very often. Now, there are people out there who are doing good work, like the Survival Coalition of Wisconsin. I've met them, attended their meetings. They're good people. But keep in mind, they are speaking for a community that's in constant need, and they are constantly putting out fires. They're putting out the most urgent needs first, because there's always an axe coming to some sort of benefits, coming to some sort of budget, and they are firefighters. They're putting out fires, and they need help from everybody possibly in this room, everybody in the community. We all deserve a chance to achieve, a chance to grow, and feel a sense of belonging. We live, we grow, we eat food, we ponder philosophical questions, and I know you don't want me to say this, Scott, we sometimes try to wear fashion as best as we can. I'm still trying to convince myself whether this is a tuck-in shirt or a tuck-out shirt. I mean, I don't know, it's pointy. If you're unsure what problems there are out there, I encourage you to talk about it. Talk it with your friends. There's a chance that they will know somebody with a disability, or they know somebody who knows somebody with a disability, because this affects 1 in 10 people. So obviously it's probably someone in your family or someone close to you. I invite you all to go out and seek out these people, talk to them, get to understand what they want, what they need, and what problems they face. I know it sounds like a big task, but if you're not already in the field, just try. All right, and I'd like to thank you all for listening.
Thank you so much, Tony. And our final video reflection of the night is from another friend of mine, Richard Brissett, who is here tonight. Let's see what Richard has to say. Just say to us on your video?
Yes.
Okay. What Richard is saying to us. Oh, I gotta watch the video. Richard.
Yes. My name is Richard Brissett, and I have mild autism. Well, I work for the state Wisconsin Department of Revenue as a data verification operator, and I've worked at my job for over 26 years. People on the autism spectrum don't work as long on a single job, but only a few have accomplished that goal, and I'm among one of them. Well, I enjoy being fast. I enjoy being one of the fastest, most accurate, proofreading for poorly scanned errors or handwritten misscanned documents. The purpose of my job, what I really enjoy, is proofreading for poorly handwritten letters or numbers, for avoiding careless mistakes, and I enjoy saying good morning to my coworkers at work. And I also enjoy making new friends there. And all my coworkers in my section and everywhere in the Department of Revenue have been very rewarding to me. And they've given me all the valuable feedback from, to clarify this, I've been getting positive feedback from my supervisor on yearly evaluation forms. Oh, I love cooking meatloaf, Mexican specialties, and pita bread pizzas. And let's just say my favorite food is pizza and meatloaf. Well, I enjoy mini golf, cooking, going to many autism social events, and Badger Camp. And I got a standing ovation last year for singing that Faith song by Stevie Wonder with Ariana Grande.
Do you want to sing a little bit of your song for us now?
Ask me how I'm doing, I'm blessed, yes. Living every moment, no regrets. Smile up on my face, I'm like, oh, yes, I'm blessed, yes, I'm blessed, yes. Waking up, thanking God. Every day is feeling just like Sunday. Happy flag by my side. Green light, everything is going my way. Right and clean, living dreams. Just left the barber and I'm feeling like Midas. Heard him say, giving praise. Once in a while, got you acting like this. And it can't go back that I don't try to thank the Lord up above. And if you wonder why I'm loving life, come close and I'll tell you what's up.
That was great.
Seek out and satisfy our preferences according to our own natures. All of these stem from the idea that human life has worth and that worth brings dignity. And our dignity on the autism spectrum is what I'm here to talk about. The Founding Fathers did not say, you only get to vote for president if you're a good runner or a good writer. They did not say, you only get to be represented by Congress if you can lift a 200-pound weight or deliver an impassioned speech. They did not say, you only deserve equal protection under the law if you can do manual labor or make a lot of money. In the U.S. Constitution, our rights are based not on our ability, but on our humanity. There were flaws in the original Constitution. People other than white male landowners were unrepresented or actively suppressed. Yet the trajectory of the American experience has, overall, been to correct these falsely selective errors. This matters to me as a person on the autism spectrum because my challenges, our challenges, are not simply matters of us being flawed or lacking order. Most of our challenges are about social values, keeping up with the demands of society, facing the social judgments of others. And many of our other challenges are existential, questions of what it means to be this person, in this role, in this history. I have a disclaimer, I can't cover all the diversity of the autism spectrum. For example, somewhere between 50 and 80% of people on the spectrum have anxiety, depression, or both. Roughly 66% of people on the spectrum have an intellectual disability. And there are many other co-occurring conditions, from learning disorders to schizophrenia. I can't speak to all of that, so I have focused on what we call autism in and of itself, assuming something as complex as autism can ever be truly self-contained. My diagnosis was Asperger's syndrome, which I still strongly prefer. That wasn't until I was 15, so I had a childhood full of questions about why my experiences didn't seem to fit what other people considered legitimate. Why shouldn't I talk about dinosaurs with other people? Why can't I wear what's comfortable to me instead of looking nice to others? Lying is wrong, so why can't I be completely honest with people? Why can't I use my full vocabulary with others? Why is being polite more about hiding the truth than about being good to people? Why do people ignore what I say and focus on how I say it? My interests, my values, my way of communicating, why should I hide these things or soften them to make them more palatable to others? The answer to these questions always boiled down to because people will judge you negatively. I don't suffer from my condition. It causes me no pain, physically or emotionally. It does no harm to my health. What causes me pain is to be attacked or rejected or perpetually misunderstood by other people. What causes me pain is for my needs to be ignored or my boundaries to be violated. What causes me pain is for others to respect me only when I am a mirror for their preferences, when I can parrot back their ideals or stay silent under their taboos. We on the spectrum see that most of society does not value us unless we reject our natural selves and conform to the preferences of others. That shuts down our chance to develop good social experience, to develop a healthy sense of identity, and to develop the confidence to pursue realistic hopes. It's not that society is full of bad people. It's that a lot of people have bad assumptions about who we are. And those assumptions are shaped by everything from diagnostic labels to social and economic achievement. I have 3 specific matters of dignity to discuss and then a few additional thoughts. Those points are diagnosis, shame, and socioeconomics. First, diagnosis. As I mentioned earlier, the current standard of autism diagnosis revolves around a deficit-based model. For better or worse, this is how diagnosis is done. And autism is defined in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, or the DSM-5. The DSM's definition of mental disorder has been criticized for serious logical inconsistencies. It's only partly reflective of neurological science. That is not just my opinion, that has been demonstrated by multiple specialists in this field. How are we supposed to feel confident about what autism is if it's based on a logically inconsistent definition of disorder? This isn't an abstract academic, political, or linguistic question. This is at the foundation of how we interpret who we are and our place in society. Just as important, it's also at the foundation of how everyone else interprets us. This matters. Even beyond that, the idea of mental disorder is an uneasy blend of objective data and social constructs. Mental disorders describe a category of social roles, not a single definite category of measurable biological factors. And let me be clear, those biological factors are real, they exist, they often deserve support. But when we call certain combinations of factors disorders, that is ultimately subjective. We do need a system of definitions in order to define who gets support services. But this thing we call autism isn't just a problem, it's a way of being. So if there are flaws in the diagnostic model, then there are flaws in how we understand our legitimacy. My brain is me. That's what I am. That's not something separate from the rest of my identity. So when someone says that my brain is pathological, when they suggest my perspective is based on deficits, when they imply that my worldview is incomplete because I'm defectively missing aspects of the human experience, I take issue with that. I am not and cannot be satisfied with the claim that my perspective is less complete, less rational, less meaningful, or less legitimate than the perspectives of people in general. Yet being considered pathological rather than culturally devalued unfairly puts all the burden of credibility on us. That brings me to the issue of shame. I have reason to think that a large percentage of people on the autism spectrum are emotionally harmed by this deficit and disorder model. I'm not attacking clinicians because clinicians are some of the best supporters on the planet, but the current model in and of itself implies lesser worth in a materialistic, status-driven society like ours. The issue is not simply the current diagnostic model, nor only our culture of consumer competition, but the interaction between the two. Some of us on the spectrum, me included, like who we are and want to be understood, respected, and have meaningful social lives. However, the majority of people on the spectrum that I have known have grappled with doubt or self-loathing or this deeply internalized shame about themselves. They believe that they are broken, that they are biologically defective, and so they think that they will never have the same moral or social legitimacy as other humans. Where are they getting these damaging messages, and how can we challenge them? This sense of shame is partly based on real difficulties because being on the spectrum does present social disadvantages. But just because a trait is devalued in our money-focused, rank-fixated culture does not make it pathological. And yet the current psychiatric model tells them that their identities are pathological. It says that they are deficient and their deficiencies are the result of brain defects. Even if you have supportive friends, family, professionals, if an expert tells you that your brain doesn't work right, how are you supposed to feel about yourself? How can you feel whole and valid and know that you deserve a place in society? It makes it seem like the problem is inside you and not in the interaction between you and how others treat you. And in a consumeristic, extroverted society like ours, people tend to either pity you or assume you're a loser. Being seen as mentally deformed automatically forces you to either hide from that stigma or to convince others that your needs, preferences, and ambitions are reasonable and worthwhile, not the unfortunate result of mental deficiencies or a broken psyche. We should not have to go on the defensive just to convince others that we are decent human beings with understandable motives and valid desires. Third, socioeconomics. Financial independence is a great path to higher dignity, but unemployment and underemployment are much higher for people on the spectrum than for the general population. Some employment difficulties are resolved by learning and growing and overcoming personal limitations, just like with people in general. But we on the spectrum own some of the responsibility for that. Some of that is on us. But most of our employment difficulties have to do with cultures and communication issues imposed by most work environments. I'm very pleased to say that more and more companies are realizing that people on the autism spectrum can be valuable in various jobs, including some very good paying jobs. But that is only a timid beginning compared to what people on the autism spectrum can contribute. Diversity training can help coworkers understand those on the autism spectrum, but it's also bigger than that. We need a culture in which people value patience enough to stop and learn, in which they value learning enough to be curious about other people's perspectives, and in which they take perspectives effectively enough to have fewer knee-jerk judgments about people with all sorts of disabilities and mental health issues. Beyond these 3 points, there are still some damaging stereotypes floating around about people on the autism spectrum. The first stereotype is that we lack empathy. The people on the spectrum I've met over the years include some of the most moral, emotionally observant, and socially responsive people that I have ever known. I myself have a master's degree in counseling, where empathy is crucial. So, with some exceptions, we have the capacity for empathy. Second stereotype, that we're deficient at humor. I think you've seen some exceptions to that tonight. In my life, most of the folks on the spectrum who are deficient at humor are ones without enough social opportunities to learn and practice humor. The majority of people on the spectrum I've worked with have had well-developed senses of humor. Not always the same kind of humor that most people expect, but it's there. Third stereotype, that we lack a theory of mind, that we can't recognize that other people have their own motives and emotions. Even chimpanzees have the basic elements of a theory of mind. There are always exceptions, but most of us are capable of perceiving and understanding that other people have distinct motives and emotions that shouldn't have to be said. Most of us don't excel at it, but it can be learned, and some of us even become very skilled at it. The final stereotype is that we prefer to be alone. Social anxiety, self-doubt, and difficulty with interpreting social signals often make it easier and emotionally safer to avoid social contact, and many of us need some time alone to recharge, but the great majority of us want meaningful relationships with friends, coworkers, and romantic partners. And it's not all on us. We have a hard time understanding others, but others also have a hard time understanding us. We want to be connected, we want to have meaningful roles in our communities, often to the point where we get depressed about being isolated, myself included. There's also language that delegitimizes and dehumanizes people on the autism spectrum. We are complete human individuals, and any word, phrase, or idea that makes it sound like we are something other than human individuals is offensive. So here's what to avoid. We on the autism spectrum are not diseased. We do not need a cure. We are not burdens. We are not like monsters, demons, or wild animals. We are not like computers or machines. We are not tragedies. We are not the loss of a real person. We are not a confusing puzzle to be completed or solved, and we are not inspirational just for being ourselves or for doing the things that other people usually do. All of which is to say, we are not metaphors. We are not imagery. We are real, we are us, and that means something. Over the course of my life, I have fought desperately to be treated as an individual instead of an abstraction. To be reduced to a stereotype or an archetype or a label or a category or an impression is to fail to be fully human in the mind of another. And to not be acknowledged as fully human is to lose so many advantages of being a social member of a social species. There is no mutual connection, no emotional reciprocity, no social intimacy with someone who sees you as a concept or a symbol or as a challenge to their own preferences. Being treated as a social role instead of as a real person shuts down the dance of interpersonal growth that comes from engaging with other perspectives. Simply put, when you see someone as an individual, you are forced to acknowledge their complexity. When you see someone as an abstraction, you're free to oversimplify them into oblivion. To others on the autism spectrum, I say this: your identity is worth having and worth fighting for. We on the autism spectrum are human individuals, and no one has the right to take our humanity away from us. Thank you. I would like to take a moment to add a couple other things. First of all, I would just like to make sure that I personally thank some of the various people and organizations who were involved in this. I would like to thank Teresa and Rupp for being straightforward and direct and practical, all things that people on the autism spectrum want and need, no drama, so that was really great for being able to make sure that this event has had more focus and direction than it would have had otherwise. I want to thank the Madison Children's Museum. I've been a part of their stakeholder team. They help promote this event. They've been making lots of great changes over there for families of people on the spectrum and with various other sensory challenges. I want to thank the Autism Society of South Central Wisconsin, who helped provide to help recruit some of the people who you saw in the videos earlier tonight. I want to thank the McBurney Disability Resource Center. The Weissman Center and McBurney have been partnering, something that I've been helping with for a student group for autism spectrum students here at UW-Madison. That's also called As We Are, although in that case it's actually an acronym. And so I wanted to make sure that all of that was taken care of for me personally, because it's so important to me that this has taken place and that we were able to bring this together. I also wanted to mention that you saw that I wasn't here when I wanted to be here, and I want to take this opportunity to explain what happened there and to use that as a teachable moment. Something that I have noticed, and something I thought about including in my remarks tonight and ultimately decided against, was that something that a lot of people on the autism spectrum really struggle with is that society in general, and everybody in this room does it, I can almost guarantee, is that in our society, people exaggerate strength and hide vulnerability all the time in every social situation, unless it's something that you really completely trust. And that is something that many people on the autism spectrum run themselves ragged doing, because for them, they are exaggerating strengths that they don't feel confident in and hiding vulnerabilities that they shouldn't have to be ashamed of. I myself, at this moment, am dealing with a migraine that began last Thursday. So this was something that you probably couldn't tell that I'm experiencing that. I had a few small slip-ups here and there, but that's pretty normal for doing public speaking. So that tells you how much this society has trained me to be able to hide vulnerability. That is something that growing up as a person on the spectrum and continuing to my professional career, it is something that I have considered to be a really important, valuable thing for me to know how to do, and yet I wish I didn't have to do it. And so for this moment, for this being something that, I was so excited, so ready to be able to introduce this event, to welcome you here, to thank all the people who were part of this, and to set the tone for the rest of the evening. And I wasn't able to do that. Those remarks that I prepared will now go unsaid. But if this is something that allows you to have a little additional slice of understanding of what it means to be a person on the autism spectrum and the kinds of things that we endure to be able to make our way and to keep up with other people, then I think that's worth it. So thank you all again for being here.